In another episode focused on National Fire Prevention Month, we'll talk with the leadership of a national research-based organization focused on the fire rescue service, including their views on the state of psychological health and safety for the industry and what should come in the future. Up next on this episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. As workplace mental health has become a global priority, there's a greater focus on addressing psychosocial hazards. Each episode, we look at psychological safety from an occupational health and safety perspective. Let's talk Psych Health and Safety. Welcome to this week's Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. I'm your host, Dr. I. David Daniels, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Each week, we seek to increase awareness of the importance of psychological health and safety by learning from the lived experiences, expertise, and research that our guests do, as well as advocating strategies to reduce harm and minimize vulnerability to psychosocial hazards in the American workplace. Over the past few years, the fire rescue and EMS community has done a pretty decent job of addressing physical illnesses, injuries, and fatalities. However, the same can't necessarily be said about psychological health and safety. In fact, in 2021, more firefighters and EMTs died by suicide than any other physical cause. This suggests that the next frontier of health and safety is actually in the arena of psychological health and safety. So it's wonderful to be able to talk to folks who are in the health and safety related arena, and they're researchers. That's what they do. And it's a pleasure to be able to get the band back together, so to speak, and talk about a really important topic, and a topic that I don't think there's been as much conversation about as perhaps there should. And these are by far some of the smartest people that I know, certainly in the fire rescue service and around the fire rescue service. So again, let's kind of get right to it. And the way I do it here is rather than me introducing folks, I like to have my guests introduce themselves, but I have a particular way that I do it. So we're going to start with this question. Who is Sara Jahnke?
Are we all answering the same one, or that's just for me?
That's just for you. And I got two more that are very similar. Well, go ahead, Sara.
Fantastic. Sara Jahnke is a researcher with the Center for Fire Rescue and EMS Health Research. She grew up in the fire service. She's a mom to three really crazy but fun kids. She's a wife. She's a sister to 7 siblings and daughter to Bill and Marilyn. Daughter of a fire chief, which I think probably shaped a lot of who Sara is today. And she's overly busy at the moment, but loving what she's doing.
Absolutely. So next question, who is Carlos Poston?
Well, I'm a grandfather to now 6 grandkids. I'm the father of a firefighter paramedic who recently retired from the fire service and finished his BSN in nursing and is going to go on in that field now. And I have been involved in doing firefighter research for 15 years now with these two folks, and also with input from you, and I've been enjoying it.
Absolutely. So similar question. So who's Chris Haddock?
Well, mine's going to sound boringly similar to those two. I also have kids. I have 2 kids. They're both adults. One's a software engineer in DC, and the other is an MBA student about to do a year overseas as part of her program. Married, have no grandkids. The odds are I won't have any. But we'll see. If you ask my kids, I won't. I started out my life as a clinical psychologist, but more on the research side. I was a psychologist for the military, active duty, seeing military people, got out, retrained in biostatistics and data science, and started working with Sara in the fire service. She's the one who was responsible for that. and actually Carlos was my first supervisor in the military. So he was the first person I reported to. So any flaws I have now is probably early training.
Clearly.
And
yeah, you can't get them all right.
Well,
but now live in lovely Lee Summit, Missouri.
Right. Absolutely. So that's again, as I said, it's just good to be able to chat with you all again. Sometimes I get people on the podcast I've never met before, and sometimes I get the privilege and pleasure of connecting with people I've known for quite a while, and you three certainly fit in that category. Again, for my audience, when I actually first started thinking about doing a doctorate, the group that I went to was these three people. As a matter of fact, I flew out to Kansas City and tried to sit at their feet and learn a few things. I'm not sure if it all settled, but if you want to do great things, you got to be around great people. So I again, just appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. So another question that I ask everyone who comes on, and really just looking for your perspective. So Carlos, we'll start with you. What does psychological health and safety mean to you? When you hear that, what does that mean to you?
I think it means that the work setting involved looks out for its people, makes sure that it addresses, just like you mentioned, there's a lot of physical hazards involved with the fire service, but there's also a lot of psychological hits that people take. In the years that my son was a firefighter medic, I can't tell you how many times he came home to tell me about some of the most awful things that I've heard about. And, like Keith said, we were both in the military. We've heard people talk about some pretty awful things before. But the fire service is in some ways unmatched in the fact that pretty much everybody gets exposed to something pretty awful at some point in their career, oftentimes multiple times. And so, making sure that we take care of people who have to take care of those pretty extraordinary situations that most people never have to encounter is, to me, what's important about that kind of psychological health and safety.
Sure. Chris, what's your thoughts?
Well, every job comes with what we think of as an inherent set of safety and psychological health risks. I think we can often engineer those out and don't. And we thought about that a lot in the military. Is PTSD really a necessary part of being in the military? Maybe, but I don't think we should assume that. And safety, I think, safety, you think of just normal safety, like, SCBAs for firefighters, but also a feeling of safety. And I think part of that is trust of your crew, trust of your field. When I was in the military, it was trust of, the people that were in my crew. I felt safe around them. I felt like they had my back. Even if they teased me mercifully, and that happens in the military, I felt like any one of them would fall on a grenade for me. So if you have that, even the teasing is good nature. But if you don't have that, all the teasing really sucks. So,
right.
And so it's just knowing that the psychological safety, nobody's putting you at excess risk. You're not asked to have risks that are necessary, and you engineer out as much of the psychological risk as you can. But like Carlos said, in the military, I saw a lot of terrible things, but more than that, because I was a psychologist, I heard awful things every day that people don't have to deal with. And, you have to, I think a lot of firefighters are great copers, and, they'd have to be in what they do. And a lot of military people are great copers, and, some struggle with it.
Absolutely. Sara, what can you add to the conversation?
Well, ditto what they said. But I think it's interesting. You mentioned the joking around and the giving each other a hard time. And I think in some ways that's one of the challenges with the fire service is that some of that is protective, that kind of camaraderie, dark humor stuff. But I really think, and I used to really think about psychological safety just being around responding to calls and kind of the impact of that. But I really have shifted that in the last few years where we see the people, and when people talk about like, what's the cutting edge of what's the next thing we should be looking at for behavioral health, I really think it's it is the it is the impact of the calls. It is the impact of seeing everyone's worst day. But I think even more than that, it is the workplace incivility and the not being, if you're robbed. I think what is resilience building about first responder groups and the kitchen table. Law enforcement doesn't have that, but they definitely have like the bond that we're all in this together. And I think the data supports that if you don't have that, if you don't have the support, if you don't feel like you can trust the people around you, then I think that's where it really becomes an unsafe environment. We used to talk about it as an HR issue, and you and I have talked about this. That's it. We really have to shift. This is not an HR issue. If it's bullying and harassment, or if it's whatever it is, it's not an HR issue. It's a health and safety issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we're going to dig into that just a bit. But so some people may be wondering, what is the National Center for Fire Rescue and EMS Health Research? What is it all about, and what are your various roles? So, Chris, I'm going to start with you. What is it y'all do, and what do you do there?
I act as the statistician data scientist essentially for Sara. Most of the stuff of what I do, I've had my own grants. I tend to be the substance abuse guy for the fire service, and usually help Carlos with the obesity and fitness stuff, and then pretty much everything else. Sara's the expert. Not that she's not the expert on that; she just tends to head up the other stuff. But I tend to do a lot of this. I've done my own work in alcohol abuse and in tobacco use. We would like to get into other drugs, although that's trickier in the fire service, having people admit to that. So, so we have to be sensitive to that. But I'm mostly what I do, Dave, is I'm the math guy.
Right. Okay. You do the thing that a lot of us don't really want to do. The math part.
Yeah, it's my jam.
Yeah. There you go. Somebody's got to do it. Sara, what's your role with the gang?
So it's so in the fire service side, so everyone has like their own areas of research too. Like Keith's leading a lot in DOD and military, and so then I support his stuff. But I kind of am the out front person and with the fire service, and so I get to go to a lot of meetings, do a lot of information gathering on what people need and building connections for the organization, those types of things. And we really like the center was born out of some early research, just looking at qualitative, like what do we need to know about health and wellness in the fire service? Most of the research that's been done has been done in the last 10 years. But I think one of the things that our group has been exceptionally good at is kind of staying at the emerging issues and identifying, as the fire service identifies issues, being there to answer those and come up with a methodology. So a lot of my role is going out and going, so I've heard that, I've got 3 phone calls on this. What should we do? How can we study it? This seems to be a sticking thing. So that kind of stuff. So yeah, I don't do any of the math. Carlos talked me out of it several years ago. He said, that's not what you're great at. So you could either work really hard to be great at that, or you could, or you could just kind of steer the ship. And I would rather steer the ship than make it go.
Yeah.
If that's,
yeah. That works. Carlos, what about you?
Well, so the Center for Fire Rescue and EMS Health Research is one of several centers that are part of a larger organization called NDRI-USA. And I'm the CEO of the larger organization, NDRI-USA. And so, what I do a lot of is try to help all the different centers. So we have a center that focuses on military and veterans health research. We have a center that focuses on health disparities, and we have a center that focuses on African-American women's lifestyle issues, and we have a center that focuses on community health. So we have a number of different centers. We have one that focuses on law enforcement. And so, my job is to try to promote research in all those centers, to try to help the investigators that in all those centers kind of grow their research programs. And the fire service is one that we've just been doing. The fire service and EMS, and military and veterans are the 2 that have been around the longest.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I'll so 2 things. One is I find it very interesting, the diversity across the screen when I think about you all as a group. because that's very unique. You all know that, but a lot of people don't. That's very unique for anybody who's looking at fire rescue related stuff. It's a pretty homogeneous bunch. But I find that in lots and lots and lots of industries, the homogeneity of the folks looking at the problem tend to dictate what the problem actually is, because what you look for, you find. And when folks have a kind of a limited perspective, they tend to go back to the same things kind of over and over again, and groups of folks get left out. And what I'm finding from a safety perspective is that those that get left out tend to be the ones who actually have the greatest risk, that are exposed to the most hazards. And a lot of that is so it's important to be able to have just different sets of eyes. And though, now, so the other thing is for the folks who are looking at the names, so Chris and Carlos are using slightly different names on their screens, but I just want to make sure I'm getting that, because I always call you Chris, but should I call you Keith? Would that be better, or is Chris okay?
It's friend choice. When I was in the military, they insisted on calling me Christopher, so I got used to it because it was my first name. They wouldn't call me by my name. They didn't care what I wanted. But I kind of got used to it. But my friends generally called me Keith, and I grew up being called Keith. So either one, though, you're not the only one that calls me Chris.
Yeah, and you know what? That's in my head now. I was listening to a podcast recently about the subtle things that we do and we don't think about that. So I go by my middle name, so which just sounds like it's some similarity there, and I go like, maybe I should think about that. So I'm in that mode just based on recent exposure. So let's dive into another kind of topic that we've hit the wave tops, but if you were to give a speech, an assessment, a presentation about the state of mental health in the fire rescue service or in public safety in general, Sara, what would you say?
I just did this last week, so I can tell you what I did say. I would say that there's been a lot of progress over the last decade. Even the fact that in a room talking about mental health, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, like we tried to do presentations on that. No one would even show up in the room.
Right.
I presented last week at Redmond, or earlier this week. I don't know. It's all, so the union's big health and wellness conference, and they asked me to present with a couple of women who were phenomenal on the behavioral health for women in the fire service. So the fact that of the very few presentations that they had in the conference that they wanted that topic specifically, I think speaks to progress and growth. I think there's so much more awareness now about the impact, everything from, we have a project on behavioral health and disaster response. We've done, some on peer support and programming, those types of things. And I think stigma is reduced, not gone, but I think it's better. That being said, I think that was the very lowest hanging fruit. Dr. Gist used to say it's not even low hanging fruit. It's like picking the rotting fruit up off the ground. So some of the early stuff was just what percent have depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress symptoms, those types of things. I think we have a long way to go. I think it's not institutionalized. There's some great resources out there, like from the union, and the disaster response is a great example. They have go teams that go out and support responding. They're in Miami right now, or Maui right now, but that's not universal, So we have a long way to go. So I'm cautiously optimistic.
Right.
And I think that we're at a tipping point where, we have the momentum, we've got the early adopters on board, and now it's time to really spread it to the masses.
Yes, absolutely. Carlos, your thoughts?
I agree with that. I think it's having seen the same pattern in the military, although I think, the military is a little bit ahead. But at the same time, even though the military may be a decade or two ahead of the fire service, they're still not very progressed as much as you'd think. I can't tell you the number of veterans and active duty service members who will say, well, I didn't want to go, talk to somebody because I thought I might lose my clearance, or this might happen, or this might happen. And I've heard the exact same thing from firefighters about that, and about, about the fear of accessing. Like most of them, in one of the studies we did, we found that most of them would never access their EAP. They don't trust them.
Right.
Yeah. So, and that doesn't leave, that means they have to go find somebody on their own insurance,
right?
If they're going to do something at all. And there's a lot of concerns, there's still a lot of stigma about going to talk to somebody, or or getting put on medications. And so I don't know. I like I said, I'm cautiously optimistic, like Sara. I think progress has been made, but I think we're a long way from even being close to equity with physical health issues.
Right. Keith, what do you think?
I often try to compare it to when I was in the military too, like Carlos does. And it was a little different issue. I was one of the guys that took your clearance away if I found out you were depressed. But I had to worry about use, with weapons, with nuclear weapons and that sort of thing. So that was tough. It was tough for you to be able to talk to me. And so, we tried to talk off the record as much as I could, but I did have my higher good was to the national security than that's why I was hired. In the fire service, what I say, I think I just would echo what Sara said, is that I see more and more, particularly as younger people are getting into the fire service, talking about mental health problems is more common. Even in Carlos and I's age group in the military, sucking it up was, how you did. And, we meant well by that, I think. Just, you're going to face terrible things. Just suck it up, get through it. But we then had the plague of PTSD and trauma after that the VA had to deal with. So I think that in terms of, the one thing I deal with a lot in the fire service that I think is always reflective of mental health is alcohol use. And, a lot of time emotional upset and heavy alcohol use goes together, and it's definitely involved in most firefighter suicides. Yeah. And I think that's something that the fire service is going to really have to take seriously, and we're going to have to take seriously, in that, as far as we can tell, the fire service is the heaviest drinking occupation in the U.S. now. Used to be us in the military, I think.
Wow.
But the fire service, when you have sometimes over half of the people report binge drinking, and that's essentially getting super drunk. And most people report heavy drinking. And that's we've done 4 studies where we've looked at rates of alcohol abuse across large samples, and it's consistent study to study. And we also know that people who drink heavily are less likely to be able to lower their trauma or PTSD symptoms. So I think that's, those sorts of things would be the next frontier, is how can they use lifestyle as a protective factor against mental health issues? Because, I don't know how we're going to get all the things that cause mental health issues to zero. You just see stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
You do. Yeah. Well. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, along those lines, I remember when my son was 17 and, looking at going into the military, and I encouraged him. I had a good friend who was at the time a captain in the Oakland Fire Department that I grew up with, and I had him talk to some other people locally, and because I really didn't want him to join the military, because I thought at that time the military is just too dangerous. The fire service would be a lot better. But I kind of learned over time that I actually didn't save him from anything.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
I got him to trade out one dangerous profession for another one. With a whole different set of risk factors and exposures and things like that. So I actually, probably put him in something that is at least as dangerous, if not more, in some ways. Because, most military people are not combatants. When you think about we're almost all, so, all firefighters, operational firefighters, are operators, but only 20% of the military is operators, combat arms type, something like that. So I think it's one of those things where, people don't appreciate the degree to which firefighters and EMS folks get exposed to pretty horrible things, and the impact it can have when it's so regular.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So in my research around the lived experience of Black workers' exposure to psychosocial hazards in the American workplace, my definition of a psychosocial hazard is a psychosocial factor that's perceived or experienced by the person exposed as a threat that in turn affects their behavior. And the psychological health and safety often gets described in circumstances or in ways that suggest the problem is the people, and I'm just not convinced of that. It is the environment. So it can't be the people, because the fire rescue service, law enforcement, even the military, they all say they're looking for the best people. They physically fit, emotionally fit. People get quote unquote washed out for all kinds of things that most other normal people have. So it can't be bad people. There are certainly some tendencies people bring with them, some trauma they bring with them, so on and so forth. But I think whoever made the point earlier, there is more that could be done to identify the hazards you're going to expose these people to, because they're known. They're known. They happen a lot, but they're known. They're not a surprise. You're going to see people, burned beyond recognition and disarticulated, and you're going to see all that. Tell people up front, and then do what you can to help give them, some resiliency up front, because we can prepare for stress a lot better. We have some idea it's on the way. It's the things that surprise us that they never told me about that. See what I mean? So I think to the work that you all are doing, there is more work that needs to be done, not only to look at how the human beings are functioning, but again, I think it goes back to Sarah's point, but the environment that we've put folks in, and in some cases kind of accepted it. That's just the way it is. Well, not necessarily. not necessarily. I just think that's a really important kind of focus. And so, I mean, where are you seeing, this is kind of, to whomever, maybe Sarah will go with you this time. Where are some of the big gaps around research in this topic that you think that really need to be filled?
So I think that there needs to be a better way to assess what's going on, measuring, and so you can change it. We've been thinking around some like network analysis stuff for like, how do you identify your change agents within a department? Because I think as we get spread information and we get information out about like the importance of some of these topics, I think we got to do a better job of identifying who our messengers are, because not just anyone can deliver difficult messages. So I think that's one thing. I think there are some, I think there's a lot looking at just like structurally the organization, like what are we doing that's making people feel, that's making people feel like they're not welcome, or like they're not. And I mean, it goes to some of our stuff. Like we've done a lot of work on research on women. And like, if you don't have, and 20% of women that we surveyed didn't have a pregnancy policy in their department. Like if you don't have policies for something that is a really pretty common, everyone's like, oh, it's, and some of the policies that are out there around like, oh, it's an injury. If it's not a work-related injury, I tell people get pregnant on duty, but no one's taking me up on that. But if it's not a work-related injury, you can't get light duty, or, it's ridiculous that it's 2023 and we don't have, everyone doesn't have some sort of policy on what, how to manage someone being pregnant. So, I mean, some of it I think is even just that institutional, how are we selecting people? We say, you're right. We say we want the best. But do we want the best, or do we want the best that are exactly like everyone else we've already hired?
Yeah. That piece.
But again, we're like, they said that people feel like, oh, that hiring process, that's in HR. It's not in HR. Like, and you have to, once you bring people in, you have to treat them well.
Yes.
Like, and so how do you get, there's this huge recruitment, fire service in particular, EMS, a huge issue with like, we don't have enough fire and EMS personnel right now. We're struggling with recruitment. Mm-hmm. So if we need the best, let's get the best of it's not just reflecting the community. Joan Olson said, I don't want it to reflect the community it serves. I want it to reflect the best of the community that it serves.
Sure.
And so I think, it's in some ways like, we're at the point where we need to start looking under every stone. It's, we've got some basic awareness out about just like the post-traumatic stress, depression, anxiety. Now what, and then the other piece of it that I think is kind of on the horizon. Well, I have so many pieces on the horizon. That's the problem. That's the problem. But I think the other thing is, when people really are struggling, where do they go? Trying to find a therapist is a hard thing to do. I mean, you're Googling psychology today.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
How do you know? And there's efforts like to train people to be culturally competent and those types of things. But like, how do you find them? How do you know if they take your insurance? And if you're struggling, that's the last thing you want to do is, be on hold for an hour with the EAP just for them to enter the last four, your zip code and get you someone. So I think those are all some of the horizon things.
Hi listeners, Jason here. We hope you're enjoying this latest podcast episode. Now, if you're like Joelle, Alicia and myself and enjoy learning from the best, then the Flourish DX Academy is for you. The Academy includes free e-learning courses on the ISO 45003 standard for psychological health and safety at work, and associated topics such as how to conduct a psychosocial risk assessment and how to create the business case for psych health and safety. All courses feature high-quality videos, downloadable resources, multi-choice questions, and a downloadable training certificate on completion. Take your learning to the next level with all Flourish DX Academy courses included within the Flourish DX mobile app. Select podcast episodes from the Psych Health and Safety podcast and sister podcasts from Canada and the USA are also included. Get started with Flourish DX for free at www.flourishdx.com/get-started. That's www.flourishdx.com/get-started. Now back to this episode.
Sure. Keith, what about you? What some thoughts about some horizons that are kind of missing some research or attention that you think we need to do something about?
Well, since I direct the military center, I always feel like I hate keeping going back to that, but I can tell you what we did. Okay. Is, you think about it in three different blocks. One is, we did look at individual vulnerabilities, and we did find some pretty potent risk factors for things like, when you experience something real like a siege in Fallujah or something like that, there's only a certain percentage of the operators that come back that will experience PTSD. Can you predict that? And there does seem to be models where you can see whether people have an increased probability of having a bad outcome versus a good outcome. We still recruit those people, but we know that they have vulnerabilities. Things like history of childhood trauma was always really big. History of mental illness, particularly severe mental illness, and history of substance abuse was strong predictors. The other thing is, so if there's a way we can identify the people that are vulnerable, the military and the fire service don't have the luxury of screening out everybody who they think has a high likelihood of having a bad outcome. The military does that for their elite schools. We used to predict who gets to go to CFREHR. And I had a friend who did that, and he could reduce to almost zero dropout if he's allowed to, because he knew the factors that increase or decrease the probability of failure. But so there's that, both to know and then also to help train those people. And then we knew that if somebody experienced a trauma and then they experienced stress after that trauma, severe stress after the trauma, either at home or at work or that sort of thing, their PTSD was more likely to stay, and they were more likely to have a bad outcome. So what do we do immediately after that? And I think Sarah's right. We learned that care quickly is better than care delayed in that case. And often it is not necessarily going to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Sometimes it's the stuff that Richard Gist talks about, where the other firefighters fix your family meals, they have you over, it's community support and rallying around you. It can be that, or it could be going to psychological care.
Sure.
If they do that. And then after, I think, making sure that firefighters get, if they do have psychological issues, they do get appropriate care.
Right.
And the military, again, is struggling with that right now. We're doing a study, Sarah and Carlos are both involved, where the primary treatment given by psychologists or psychiatrists to people with full-blown PTSD is what they call supportive therapy. In other words, they chit-chat with them. And the military is trying to get their clinicians to use treatment modalities known to work rather than just chit-chatting with people. And we know that chit-chat generally does not have an effect. Usually those people, their PTSD remains. So I think thinking about it in that way, the fire service getting smart about where they send people, like Sarah said. The fire service getting smart about what do you do when an event happens. And a lot of that's going to be rallying around that person with the firefighters. And then do we need to look at vulnerabilities of people coming in?
Right. Carlos, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big opportunities in the near future are going to be, so we just went through a huge pandemic that I think had a really negative impact on both people in fire service, EMS, and, hospital first responder, like emergency department people. I think it probably aged them in the profession, in the 2 to 3 years that they were responding, to the much higher call volume, much sicker people. It yeah, I think it probably aged them double the amount of years involved that they were responding. And, yet most departments and most places didn't really do anything about it. They had nothing set up to address, how people were getting burned out and leaving the profession because they just couldn't take it anymore. So I think, planning for future, when a out of the box calamity happens, having better plans for how to address those issues, particularly for the people who respond, is, I think, going to be very important. And then, like Sarah said, I think just finding ways to deliver services to people that they're going to be willing to use, where they don't feel like they're being stigmatized, is going to be important. Because if you have the greatest treatment in the world, but everybody hates it, then it's really not going to do anybody any good.
Yeah. No doubt. Yeah,
if people are too afraid to use it.
Yes. I wanted to sure you all may have heard this, but as I mentioned, we're about at least 10 years behind Canada, the UK, and Australia. And I happen to know, actually going through having some conversations with the folks. There's a company in Australia that actually sponsors this podcast. The fine folks at Flourish DX. I think they jump on and do a commercial every now and then. Sometimes people don't even know who they are, but they have laws in place in Australia that are forcing employers to address psychological health and safety the same way they do physical health and safety. And in the UK, they don't necessarily have different laws, but they say, no, the existing laws in terms of the general duty and all that, it also applies to psychological health and safety. And in Canada, they've had a standard for 10 years. I'm saying all of that to suggest that if we want to continue to call ourselves the leaders of, number one at this and that, we've got some stuff to do. We've got some catching up to do. And I don't think it has to take as long. It doesn't, because a lot of this research, a lot of this conversation has already been had. So what is it going to take to be able to apply it? And, and there's a part of me that thinks that, the Fire Rescue Service might be a place that could help kind of carry that banner. A lot of folks don't think about, public sector workers, when they get injured, it costs everybody. It costs everybody. That firefighter you have to replace, that EMT, that police officer, that somebody in the military. When they are injured or killed, it costs all of us. So it should matter. It should matter in the private sector as well, for those of us who just care about people. But these are investments we're all making. And, this issue around recruitment and such, it actually, to me, comes down to whether or not the environment is safe for people or not.
Well, let me ask you something about that, Dave, if you don't mind. Military is having exactly the same problem with recruitment now, if not worse, than the fire service. Military's won awards for diversity. We get slammed in the media all the time for DEI efforts. There's been a bunch recently where things that people were doing were castigated by people in the media. So, for all its faults, I think the military's trying in that area, and they still have. Is there a generational difference between people wanting to go into these kind of uniform professions? Is there something else going on?
So again, I don't have the research to back it up. So I'm going to give a little opinion here, but yeah, of course it is. So Generation Z is going to be the most diverse generation of our history. They think differently. And we have so many institutions, the military and fire rescue service and law enforcement, certainly leading the pack. They're built on an old model and they change too slow. They just do. So, but again, it's the same issue in business. Do you want to be able to recruit that group of people, whoever that group of people is, or do you want to just write them off and say, so if you want to say half of the population you don't want them to go work there, that's okay, but you won't be in business long. You won't. And the same thing goes for a lot of these services. You won't get the public support of, the folks that you're excluding unless you figure out how to include them. And a lot of that is simply a system that is safe, emotionally safe for people. Because if it's not emotionally safe, I won't show up for the physical stuff. And I think we've not placed enough importance on how do people feel about this? And that's the data you get back. It doesn't feel so good. And there are tweaks we could make even at the individual level. If you hired them or you engaged them, appointed them, whatever, and you're going to expose them to that hazard, you have a responsibility to think about the hazard, to figure out how we're going to manage it as best we can and how to deal with it just in case it occurs.
So how much do you think that's a factor? Because it clearly is. No argument from me there. And I'm around a lot of teenagers because I have teenagers. And their thing is, if it doesn't come with a flex schedule and I can't work at home several days a week, I'm not even applying.
Yeah, that's right too.
How much is it? Law enforcement, fire service, military? You can't do that.
Who says?
They say.
Yeah.
You do that military. Try doing military over Zoom.
That's the point. Again, many of the leaders involved in the fire service and law enforcement, and EMS, and in the military, everybody said we can't work from. Everybody said that in February 2020, and in March of 2020 they figured out how to do it. So again, the reality is, of course, not everyone. You can't do everything, but there are ways to create a space, a workplace that is more conducive to the people that you think you want to do it. And often it's about asking, what will work better for this group of people? See what I mean? It's different. I don't think it costs as much as people think it does because you're having the issue with recruitment anyway and retention. Lovely conversation. But see, these are the kinds of discussions that really need to be had if all of our public services are going to get better. If we keep doing them the same way, we're going to have the same problems we had before. And that's not
how would you restructure the fire service to make it to where people could have flex schedules and work from home? What would you do?
Oh, yeah. You want me really? You really want that? So
no, actually, the reason I ask you is because I know you tend to have solutions I don't even think of. So.
Yeah. So the first of
is what I'm saying.
No, seriously. So in the fire rescue service, there's the model is built around what happens 3 or 4% of the time. Everything is built around that, and that's the first problem. Is that why you have this entire? A matter of fact, I was discussing this with a friend of mine the other day. The latest, most recent information we have from a study about 6 or 8 years ago suggests we spend $328 billion a year on fire protection for a $14 billion problem. Often because we continue to do it the same way year after year after year after year to focus on one problem that probably is either solved or isn't an issue, and not focus on the ones that are. So there are many communities, and again, this is another reason why nobody will ever. I don't get a lot of conversations with fire rescue people. There are some places that don't need fire trucks at all. They don't. They need something else, but they don't need a fire truck because they never use them. But if there's an entire system that's been built that way for so long, and it doesn't focus on, again, the issues that really are important to these communities, which is the healthcare related stuff that they do. You see what I mean? So there are ways to do that very differently, but it would require dumping some of the command and control ways that people look at this and having more conversation about, so what is the problem we're trying to solve? Who are we trying to serve it with? And how do we want to solve it? Not how do I or you, how do we want to solve it? That means you can't cut people out because women have opinions about it. Short people have opinions about it. Gay people have opinions about it. We've all got opinions about it, but only certain voices get heard. So you see what I mean? That could be a much longer conversation, like over a beverage that I don't necessarily drink. So, but again, all of these are these are really important conversations to be had. And again, they just don't apply to the fire rescue service, because particularly across government. Government's got this same kind of, we do it the same way. Why? Because we've been doing it for 220 years and blah, blah, blah. And we're all complaining about it doesn't work. So when are we going to change it? Well, I think the kids might have to, because they're saying, look, I'm not going and you can't make me. And I don't need the job all that bad. So now what?
Right.
So now what? Yes. So go ahead.
There are, and I can't remember where this was, but there was recently department that I heard about that they still do, 24-hour shifts, but they also have an option where part of the department's on either 8 or 12-hour shifts.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a different schedule, but they actually have different shifts for different, because some people, the 24-hour shift doesn't work for, them to have families and things like that. It's interesting.
I do have some, I have some, still a few friends in fire rescue service are talking about that. It's just difficult to get people to get it. But, the 24-hour shift schedule has some benefits, but also has some liabilities from a physical and emotional health perspective. Who says that fire rescue folks and EMTs shouldn't be on pitch counts? After you've gone on X number of things, you got to do 28, 29, 30 calls. You have to. Why? Why? Because we kind of always have. So again, exposing people to more and more and more and more trauma with little or no end. And let's all be honest. Many of the EAP systems, and you all mentioned it before, people don't trust them. It's not that they're terrible, but people don't trust them because they're not. We don't know who these people are, and where'd they come from, and particularly if there's some friction between kind of the leadership and the workers, it's just difficult. So let's cut through some of the bureaucracy and look for solutions to the problems and issues that we really have. Again, based on that's what research does for us, is give us the facts, not the we've always done it this way over and over thing. And again, ultimately, I also believe that one of the big issues, a lot of this stuff is cost, and it costs so much because we're doing it wrong. Or doing it old, I should say, in some cases. So what's, as we start to conclude the conversation, if you did have, again, the magic wand and could, what's the thing that you would go after right away? And so this might be, for those who are out there looking to, support a research-related group. What's that one thing that you really want to get after? And if you had the resources, you'd go after it right now. Sarah, I can feel you. Go ahead.
No, my problem is you want me to narrow it down to one. And that's, the one thing, you know what? Honestly, the one thing I'm most excited about today, which is different from yesterday and will be different from tomorrow, is we've started the Science to the Station, and it's around creating the network of the people who are interested in health and wellness in the fire service. So we've got a group of OC Health folks. We have like 1,600 people. You should sign up. I'll send you the link. Because I think that will go further faster. Did I say that right? Further faster if we can connect with the people. Yes. And then we can take, we brought a graphic designer on full time, and I really think she's probably one of the most valuable members we have on the team, because she takes stuff and she puts it in one pager. Right. So I think there's a lot of big things that we need to tackle, but I think right now we have this flood of information. We have this flood of research in the fire service. And I think the current low hanging fruit is let's create the pathway to translate that and get that out. Me standing in the wilderness screaming, it's a health and safety issue, not a HR issue, that gets to 10 people at a time, but not. So that's my in this moment, most exciting thing.
Right. Carlos, your thoughts?
If I could wave a magic wand and destigmatize, people, mental health issues, that's what I'd like to do. Just because like I said, I think the stigma alone is what keeps a lot of people from ever getting the help they need, and then by the time they do, it's because they've made a mistake. They've gotten a DUI, or they've done something else that gets them in trouble. I got a call last week from some of the firefighters I know in Maui, and they're anticipating huge fallout from from the wildfires and all that, and not just in the community but amongst people in the department. And already there's a ton of finger pointing at the firefighters now that they didn't do their job, that they should have done better, their response. So it's not just what happened, but it's the aftermath and all the finger pointing and the blame and stuff like that. And you know as well as I do that a lot of those folks are never going to go talk to somebody.
That's right.
Even though they might need to.
That's right. Because you mentioned it, I don't know if you've heard of, there's a group called Shatterproof that you might want to reach out to talk about destigmatization. That's something that they do. They're a nonprofit. But so okay. Keith, what about you?
Well,
Magic wand.
I was in there struggling to say something different from Carlos and Sarah, and so here's what I've got.
Well, I changed mine to Carlos's.
Okay. I want to do something completely different in that if I wanted to make sure the fire service, if firefighters stayed stressed, have a lot of trauma, are depressed, and are ugly to each other, I would do these things. I would make sure they're sleep deprived. I would give them metabolic syndrome, and I would have them drink heavily. And if I wanted to make sure that whatever Carlos and Sarah did with their magic wand didn't work, I would make sure those things never change. So, we know that somebody who has metabolic syndromes, somebody who has insulin sensitivity, somebody who's sleep deprived and drinking a lot rarely benefits from treatment. And why is it that the stereotype of firefighters, the firefighter calendar, but the reality of a firefighter is somebody who's obese, who drinks heavily, and who can't meet basic physical fitness guidelines. And I think it's what you said, Dave. We designed an organization that makes sure that happens. And so that's always been the things that shocked me and Carlos the most coming out of the military, is that is seen as fine. It'd be great if it was better, but we definitely won't change what would need to be changed to make that not the case. And I really think that everybody kind of knows that, but they don't know how much that drives everything else.
Right. Absolutely. So as we conclude this wonderful conversation, I think there might be people who pass by and I didn't even know there was that research group there, fire service. They didn't know anything about you all. So they know a little bit more about you, and they may be interested in following up and hearing a little bit more about your individual research pursuits and then what's going on more globally. So what's the best way to connect with you, Keith?
They're telling you.
No, I'd go to our website. We have all our contact information on there. Sure. I have my it's Haddock at NDRI-USA.com, but you'll see it on there. If you have show notes, we can put their websites in the show notes. I welcome calls and emails and that sort of thing. I love answering questions of firefighters or safety folks, or getting ideas from them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Carlos, how would folks find the CEO?
Just go to the website, like he said, www.ndri-usa.org. And we have a list of all of our centers there, so people can look up the various centers. They can look up, individual investigators or scientists there. They can look up some of the grants that we're doing right now. We also have Facebook pages or social media pages for most of our centers. So, Sarah can tell you more about that. But so you can go to those sites also.
Absolutely. Sarah, anything?
And we also have science-alliance.org, which is our dissemination. That's the science to the station. So science-alliance.org has all of the, when we put a white paper out or we put an infographic out or any of that stuff, it's all there. So, and it has a contact us, so you can join the club. If they want to join, they can put their membership code as Dave, and it'll give you it'll give them their first year free.
Oh, okay. All right. Of all things. All righty. Well, again, thanks so much for taking time out of your otherwise busy schedules of traveling, researching, and attempting to change the world. But I appreciate all of you. We have some other conversations we'll be having soon about, perhaps pushing some of these ideas forward. Again, I really do believe that the fire rescue service and its EMS colleagues specifically have the opportunity to do some things sometimes that other industries can't do. Because again, as much as we talk about some of the challenges, they also have a kind of camaraderie and a kind of, individual interpersonal relationships and a kind of system that is unrivaled in any industry that I'm aware of. And I popped around a couple of them. So again, get just some opportunities. And again, to the point that I was making earlier, if the folks who generally cost local government the most can solve this, they can share this with their Parks and Recreation colleagues and with the public works folks and with the other folks. It can really be a start to something great. So again, thanks so much for your participation today. So if you're watching this episode on the Flourish DX YouTube page, please do like and subscribe and share with your friends. If you're watching or listening to the podcast for the first time, welcome. I hope something that you heard will bring you back in the future. Previous episodes of the podcast can be found at psychealthandsafetyusa.com. And please do become a part of the Psych Health and Safety USA movement by connecting with us on LinkedIn. We'll certainly look forward to seeing and hearing more on the next episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. Thanks very much. Tune in each Friday for new episodes of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. If you have a story or know of one that needs to be told, reach out to us on LinkedIn or send an email to david@id2-solutions.com or go to the Flourish DX website at flourishdx.com. We'll see you next time.